Hello, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. We have a webinar for you that got more exciting in the last 16 hours than what we had planned. So I do hope this is something that's good. We scheduled it for 45 minutes, but given the late breaking news yesterday, there's a possibility it goes a little bit longer. So hope you can stick around for the whole thing. My name is Marcus Eeman. I'm a senior customs manager here at Flexport. And if you've attended these webinars regularly, you might notice we have a new platform that we're using today. So before we dive in, I'm going to go over a few quick housekeeping notes to get yourself oriented. On your screen, you see a sidebar on the right of the main stage where you can submit questions. At the end of this presentation, we'll host a Q&A and answer some audience questions. So try to get your questions in early, and we'll try to get to yours here. On that same sidebar, you can also see a tab labeled Docs. This is where you can download a copy of today's slides and find some other helpful resources. Above your screen, you have a button to request an ACE analysis from Flexport. It's something that we like to plug and we feel very, very good about. We will review in further detail about the presentation and talk to you about it, but please click that button if you want Flexport to reach out to you to discuss an ACE analysis for your business. Okay, now slide 2, just a brief legal note. Please keep in mind that all this information is provided in the session is based on the situation at this current time, and maybe not be customized to your specific business requirements. We always recommend reaching out to a Flexport expert to discuss your particular situation. Okay, and let's have our speakers today. Right now, it's just two of us today. I have my colleague, Alex Nederlof. He is our Senior Director of Engineering for Customs and Financial Services. He does a lot of the tech side. So as I try to understand what's going on, he looks to try to make it happen, both in our internal and external systems. So very happy to be sharing the stage here with Alex. Okay, so with that, let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to go over the latest news, which got even later, some freight side advice. So just a little bit here, we're coming up on some very key dates, and I talked to some of my freight colleagues to find out maybe what should people be planning on. We're going to talk about what's coming up next. We know where we are today, but what happens after today. And then we want to go through our Tariff Simulator, a tool that Alex and I and several others worked really hard on the last few weeks here to get launched, and we want to walk it through with you. And so we want to show some cool examples about what we can do, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. All right, the latest news. So the quick headlines. First, the in-transit provision on IEEPA was extended, from May 27 to June 16 arrival. So if it left before, in early April, it had to arrive by May 27th, but they extended it by a few weeks, saying actually, if it's in transit, it still applies by June 16th. Quick reminder on that, Customs did say very specifically they don't count transloads or feeder vessels in that timeline. So if you had something that maybe left India, transloaded in Singapore, and Singapore was the last foreign port before coming to the United States, Customs is only going to count the departure date from Singapore, not from India. So some importers are disagreeing with that and making their case to Customs, but that is the current interpretation that CBP is enforcing. Second, what I thought was going to be a very small bullet that just got pushed into prominence here is that Section 232 on steel and aluminum is increasing to 50% on June 4th, but there's quite a few other things that are happening here today, and we'll go through that on the next slide. This point 3, for anybody that still had some of the Section 301 exclusions, that's 9903, 8869, 9903, 8870. Those exclusions are actually extended to August 31st. They were going to expire here May 31. There's a little over 100. There's also some exclusions for semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Those exclusions, you have a few more months to import. This was a bit of a surprise. So nice to have that if you're one of those few importers who can still claim some of those original 301 list exclusions. And fourth, what I thought I was going to be talking about today, which I still will talk about today, is that last week there were two court cases, one in the in the Court of International Trade, and one in the DC Federal Court that made some headlines. We'll talk a little bit about what that means and how it actually is impacting business coming up here. So with that, let's go to the next slide here and see who ran onto stage. Sorry for the very info-heavy slide, but it was more than just what I thought. What the president had said at on Friday was we're going to change the 232 tariff amounts from 25% to 50%, but he actually did quite a bit more, which made for some late nights and early mornings all around here. So that was the first change, the cleanest to understand. But there's also two other main changes that are a little bit more complicated. And so I'm going to walk through a few examples of what some of these changes mean. The second one here is a changing of the tariff applicability order for both Canada and Mexico. So previously, if something was subject to IEEPA fentanyl duties, this was the fentanyl IEEPA duties back from February, March. If something was subject to those, then any 232 duties, the national security duties on steel and aluminum or steel and aluminum product derivatives, those did not apply. But as of starting today, if something is subject, they reverse the order. So if something is subject to the Section 232 steel and aluminum duties, then the IEEPA fentanyl for Canada and Mexico doesn't apply. So instead of looking at fentanyl first and then going to looking at the effect on 232, what they're saying is look at the 232 applicability first, then decide about whether or not the IEEPA fentanyl for Canada and Mexico does apply. What this does is this effectively moves goods that had flagged for both the IEEPA fentanyl from Canada or Mexico and Section 232 from 25% to a higher 50%. So instead of saying, okay, we're just going to have this apply with 25%, because it's subject to IEEPA, now it says, no, it's 50% because it's subject to 232 and we're going to ignore the IEEPA. And so if we take a look on the right-hand side of the slide here, you'll see an example that I sort of put together. So say we have some, aluminum bakeware, 100% aluminum, non-USMCA qualifying. So if you had imported this June 3rd and before, your entry summary line would look something like this. You'd have your 9903-0110, your 25% IEEPA fentanyl from Canada code, right? Then you're also going to have your 7615, your regular commodity code of 3.1%, but you would have been exempted from the 232 duties on aluminum. That would have given your total duty rate to be 28.1%. However, as of June 4th and after, because of this reversing of the order, we have something a little bit different. It's now going to look something like this. You're going to have a 9903-8507 code, which instead of being worth 25%, is now going to cost 50% for the aluminum derivative articles, as well as the standard 3.1%. But now it's going to be exempt from the 25% IEEPA fentanyl Canada. So that means your total duty rate for this product starting today and after is 53.1%. So in a way, this makes sure that the 232, there's no more, kind of favorable treatment that could have been coming from Canada or Mexico. They are now kind of evening out. And so that 50% is going to be felt for Canadian and Mexican products as well. They don't get kind of a bypass or anything kind of like that. I do want to highlight one other kind of somewhat counterintuitive quirk that also resulted from this ordering changes here. If you import USMCA qualifying auto parts that flag for both the 232 order on auto parts and the 232 order on steel or aluminum, it's actually probably cheaper now to not claim USMCA. Whereas before, you could claim USMCA for the excluded from the 232 and the auto parts, you'd still have to pay the 25% for Section 3 or for Section 232 on steel and aluminum, 25%. But now, if you claim USMCA auto parts, you don't get that exclusion means you're no longer subject to the 25% auto, and you would now have to pay the 50% steel and aluminum. So let me say that again. That's a little bit of a weird, quirky example here. If you have something that qualifies for USMCA, it flags for both the automotive 232 and the steel and aluminum 232. If you're claiming USMCA on it, it's probably more expensive now because you are going to be forced into paying the 232 duties on steel and aluminum. Even though you're now avoiding the ones on automotive, you now have to pay those steel and aluminum ones. So that is definitely something I think is very a little bit a weird consequence of some of this reordering here. Maybe you no longer want to claim USMCA. Maybe take a look at it. There's maybe some other considerations if you're using USMCA to build sub-assemblies here and you're trying to have originating products, going down the line. Don't just say like, okay, Marcus said, never claim USMCA on auto parts again. There's some consideration here, but all of a sudden we've seen a little bit of a change in the flow where maybe USMCA may no longer be in your advantage. Do run it against your entire kind of supply chain. Make sure that if you're going to try to use these USMCA products as part of a double substantial transformation, a double origination change, you may need to say we still will pay it, we'll still claim it, but very, very interesting, funny consequence that kind of got buried in this. This third one, this third bullet, reciprocal tariffs also now apply to non-232 lines. So before, if a product had any steel or aluminum on it at all, the entire thing was exempted from the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs. That is no longer the case. And on the next slide, I'm going to walk through an example about how that point 3 works. And the final one is that there's now language in there that says there's value breakouts for intra 73 and intra 76. So remember, there's derivatives. There's two kinds. There's derivatives that are from outside of Chapter 73, outside of Chapter 76. But then there's also derivative products of steel and aluminum that are within Chapter 73, that are within Chapter 76. And if there's a silver lining to any of this, it's that now you are allowed to break out the value of the non-steel and non-aluminum portions of your 73 or your 76 article and only pay duty on the steel or aluminum content. Whereas before, you couldn't do this on the intra 73 and the intra 76, only the extra 73, the extra 76. So those are a little bit a little interesting here as well. So if there's any kind of very nice fig leaf, token benefit, that may be one that you could use to save a little bit more money. So maybe you have products that are rightly classified in 73, they're on their list, you've been paying 25% on the whole value. Well, now you can break out some of that value if it's in 73 or if it was in 76. Okay, let's go to an example of how this reciprocal tariffs now apply to this point 3 here. So let's take a look at an example here, June 3rd and before. So let's say we had a $10,000 shipment, country of origin, New Zealand, just to avoid any free trade agreement entanglements. And our HTS code is 830250, some sort of miscellaneous bracket or hat rack. It is on the derivative list, right? 80% of the value is aluminum. So before June 3rd and before, line 1, you kind of split this out, right? You have your first line where you don't have your 232, you don't have your steel content, and you have your second line where you list your steel content. So the first line was $2,000 of value. You applied the exemption code saying you're exempt from this 10% reciprocal because the product itself is subject to 232 duties. You don't have any duty rate on that first line. Your second line, though, is where you do apply that aluminum 232 tariff code. So you have an $8,000 value on your second line, 8,000 of that total 10,000, right? The first one, you have your 8508 code, 25% section 232, and that's your aluminum like extra 76 derivative, 25%. But you are exempted from that 10% reciprocal. You don't have and your standard duty rate is free. So the total duty for the import is 25% just on the $8,000 value. So 25% just on the aluminum value. You don't apply the 25% to the non-aluminum value, and there's no reciprocal tariffs on either of those two lines. So your total duty was $2,000. So now, June 4th and after, suppose we have this same shipment, $10,000 value, country of origin, New Zealand. HTS, still same thing, still like maybe a bracket, 80% aluminum, maybe there's like some wood accents that are the remaining 20%. Line 1 still has your $2,000 value. But notice that first code, you don't get to claim that 9903.01.33 exemption from the 10% reciprocal. You still have to pay that 10% reciprocal duty under this new interpretation, under these new rules. So that just increased your duty amount most, increased, it was the biggest change on these two lines, even though on the second line you'll see a larger monetary impact. There's just more of kind of a philosophical impact. And so we had thought originally maybe this is how it was always going to be. Then Customs gave out very specific guidance, and I guess I'll admit I haven't checked CBP's website today to see if they still are advising this, but they had published guidance on their website advising you to do things in accordance with the second side, the June 3rd and before. They've now changed that. The president's new order has changed that. Line 2 is this $8,000 value. And because this is actually paying 232 duties on this same line, that still does get the exemption, even though the 232 has increased now to 50%. So you get your standard free rate of duty. The total import value is 10% of 2,000, the $2,000 value, the reciprocal value, plus 50% of the 8,000, meaning your total outlay, your total duty spend on this product is now $4,200, with that extra 200 coming from this chain to the applicability of reciprocal tariffs. Okay, so I'm going to look for questions on that because I'm sure there was some, and we may have to come back to this slide, but I just wanted to kind of run through a couple of examples here. You can download the slides if you wanted to kind of print out some like kind of clear understanding of how this works. But this was definitely something we weren't expecting based on Friday's announcement, which is why we only really try to implement things that are official, actually as they're written, not based on a speech or you know, an informal source. We only look at official documents. So. Okay, I think we can move on from the 232 here, and let's talk about a little bit what I thought I was going to be talking about today, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruling. So I'm just going to talk about one. There was a second one that was from the D.C. Circuit Court. I'm just going to let that one sit, but I do want to talk about this one here. The court said in this ruling, it's about 49 pages, they said that IEEPA doesn't give unlimited authority to the president to do so, which is interesting. The president asserted it. He said in this case, like, yes, it does give me this authority. I can do anything. Virtually all powers are, you know, assigned to this to deal with any kind of emergency situation. The court disagreed and said that the legislative history of IEEPA doesn't suggest that. It doesn't actually specifically mention tariffs. And when you have, you know, the Constitution saying the tariff power is for Congress, and unless Congress very specifically mentions a tariff power moving under IEEPA, they don't buy it. So they didn't do that. The other part, as part of the rationale, as I said, the tariffs don't actually deal with the emergency. Like, okay, suppose there is this emergency at the border with, you know, the opioid crisis from Canada, right? How does a tax or a tariff on maple syrup stop the flow of fentanyl from Canada? How does a tariff on avocados from Mexico stop the flow of drugs or the migrant crisis at the southern border? They said that it wasn't related to, you know, the means to try to resolve the crisis weren't related to the actual crisis itself. And also, this emergency wasn't exactly the extraordinary situation that it was required to be under the National Emergencies Act. They were ordered, the court ordered CBP to stop collection within 10 days of these IEEPA duties, but that was paused while this has been on appeal. So for right now, this is a very loud sound, but it doesn't actually really do anything. IEEPA duties still being collected, no change for current imports or importers. What was a little bit interesting is that the question of de minimis wasn't clarified. The restrictions on de minimis for China were part of one of the executive orders that were supposed to be stayed by this court ruling. But it wasn't actually specifically addressed. And so there's a question like, well, wait a minute. If you're saying that these IEEPA orders, including the ones that stopped de minimis, weren't allowed, and that they're illegal, is de minimis still allowed now for China? It seems like no, but it's an unresolved question. It seems like that's something we're still going to want to see exactly what they say. Does the CIT come out and clarify further about the applicability of de minimis? And also the questions of refunds was also not addressed in either the decision or the court's order. So how refunds are going to be calculated, when they're going to be given, who needs to give them, how do importers get it, that's not defined either. So those are a little bit two murky questions that are pretty important that we're not quite sure exactly what this means, what we're going to see. So what needs to happen next is that the Court of Federal Appeals for the Federal Circuit is deciding this appeal. So they agreed to keep the stay of the order in place, right? The order would actually prevent the collection of duties. They said they stay the order, meaning the stopping is stopped. The double negative there, in short, means that the IEEPA duties are continued to be collected. The Supreme Court could also weigh in. That would be the next level appeal, depending on the decision here. And what else could happen are potentially more duties. So I don't think this necessarily changes the overall effect for most importers. It just may change its form. And I'm going to talk about Section 122 and Section 338 on later slides. You may have heard some headlines about these. Even Section 122, I should mention, was mentioned in the CIT's decision. So CIT was definitely pointing that way, and so that could, you know, Section 122 could see some life. Okay, so let's move on here. That was kind of a bit of the news here. But let's do a quick pause. Let's just cleanse our palate here. It's a little freight side advice. I was thinking, you know, we have all these dates coming around here. We have all these changes that happened. Who knows what's going on here? And so I wanted to say, okay, well, given all the stuff that has happened and some of these 90-day pauses, what does that actually mean for me on the freight side? I'm not a freight expert, but we have freight experts here, and I asked them about some advice here. So the question really is if I want to try to beat some of these potential tariffs before these pauses come to a close, when should I move them, right? So April 9th, Trump said, okay, we're not going to do those country-specific things. I'm not going to put tariffs on Svalbard and Jan Meyer, right? I'm not going to do that. We're going to just do 10% for everybody, while every country negotiates their own trade deal with the U.S. And so that 90-day pause comes to an end on July 8th. Then on May 14th, Trump paused the 125% reciprocal on China, right? So he increased it. It was going to be 34, then 84, then 125. It was 125 for about a month. And then he said, okay, we're going to pause this here while we look to make a deal with China. Well, that 90-day pause ends on August 12th. And finally, he also said we're working with the EU to try to figure out some sort of trade deal. I was going to increase tariffs on them, but now I'm going to wait until July 9th. And so these are kind of those 3 dates that are sort of sitting out there for a lot of imports. Like, okay, July 8th, this 90-day pause on the country's non-China reciprocal tariffs comes to an end. July 9th, that's this negotiation deadline with the EU. Otherwise, it's 50% reciprocal in the EU starting then. Okay, and then potentially we go back to a higher 34% reciprocal rate on August 12th with China. So the question at the top of the slide, if I wanted to beat those potential deadlines, when should I be moving my goods? July 8th for every other country, July 9 for EU, and August 12 for China. When do my goods need to be moving? When do I need to be booking by? When should they be getting here? Well, let's go to the next slide. We'll kind of go through what our freight team provided to me. Now, they made me promise that I'd say, hey, I'm not going to overcommit you guys, that I'm only going to speak in very general terms. So I'll start with the disclaimer at the bottom. This is general guidance only based on historical trends for demonstration purposes. So your own shipping needs will be different, but just wanted to get a little bit of advice in case you trade professionals, talk to your folks on the supply chain and the freight side. So let's say you wanted to move something from Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, rest of world, right? And you wanted to get there by July 8th. Now, I know I said that July 8th is the effective date for the end of this 90-day pause, but we want to build in a little bit of buffer. There's a lot of bookings going on right now, a lot of sailings happening. Last thing you want is some port congestion to delay your arrival. Let's just give you a 3 days margin here. So July 8th for rest of world. Let's try to target July 5. Okay, well, EU is going to affect July 9. Well, let's target a July 6 arrival just to buy you an extra day, a little bit of buffer. Or what about the August 12th deadline for China? Well, let's just maybe target August 8th as your ETA, just to make sure if something comes a day late or 2 days late, you're not stuck. If you're trying to book from Vietnam, and if you're trying to get product from Vietnam, book now. You may already actually be too late for ocean, and you should look to do some air freight moves at this point from Vietnam or rest of world. If you're concerned that those high reciprocal rates, remember Vietnam is 46%, Cambodia 49%. If you're concerned about some of those higher rates, this is the time to potentially look to move things. It would need to load on an ocean vessel by June 8th, a few days from now. So hopefully you've already had it booked. And the average transit time being 26 days, that would get you to about July 5. If it loads on June 8th, moves 26 days, get you to July 5, couple of days of buffer in case of weather delay or something. What about going EU to New York City here? You wanted to get there by July 6 just to make sure you have a little hedge against the July 9 deadline. You should probably be booking today. So if you have any kind of shipment soy or something, take a look at what are your high duty items maybe. What are some of your more EU specific things, and say, okay, we need to really prioritize these bookings today. Ideally, you'll be on the vessel in 2 weeks by the 19th. That transit time from Rotterdam to New York City is about 16 days. So if you want it by the 6th, you probably need it loaded by the 19th. Shanghai to LA Long Beach, as an example, route from China, you got a little bit more time here. You have a little bit of leeway. You still actually may be able to work with your factories, try to pull forward some orders, encourage them to do a little faster production. You should probably book this by July 8th, is what they said. And so that'd be about 2 weeks in advance, a little bit more, to then have it load by July 23rd. You want to onboard by July 23rd. Shanghai to Long Beach is about 16 days, but I'm building another 4 days of buffer here, just because I'm sure there's going to be quite a few of your friends and competitors and neighbors in your industry who may also try to be beating these tariffs on the same duration. So the 16-day transit time that gets you to arrive. If it loads on the 23rd, that'll probably get you arriving around August 8th. Plenty of time, 4 days before the August 12th effective date or the end of the 90-day pause with China. Okay, so that's a little bit about kind of what's happening now. So what is next? What are we looking for around the corner? Well, there's really kind of two things I'm sort of looking at around the corner. And the first one we have to take a look at the president's tariff toolbox. He is no stranger to this. He's been using it since his first administration here, but he's using it again. He's already kind of gone through a few things, but as you notice, there's a couple of tools that have kind of fallen out of the box already that are maybe the next ones to be picked up. The first one I want to highlight is Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. This was meant as kind of a short-term stopgap. What it allows is a 15% tariff on countries with a balance of payments problem with the United States, a balance of payments imbalance, for a period of 150 days. So for 150 days, there can be a 15% tariff on a country's goods. Now, Section 122 has never been used, and there was a congressional review of some of these tariff measures back in February. And what they noticed is they said the Section 122 legislative history was focused more about balance of payments, current account deficits, may have kind of gone around with like the gold standard and some of these other sort of like overall trade in goods and services. So the question that is unresolved and unknown is, does balance of payments equal balance of trade? It won't take much for a White House lawyer to make that argument, and there's certainly evidence that they could. But what this would mean is that very quickly they could institute 15% duty on anything, which sounds an awful lot like the 10% IEEPA reciprocal, right? So if they happen to, say the 10% reciprocal duties are defeated in court, right? Supreme Court 9-0 says IEEPA reciprocals are not allowed. Well, very quickly the president could roll out Section 122. There's no investigation required. It could just happen very quickly. In fact, if you read the CIT ruling, as part of the rationale for their decision, the court says, well, there's other tools in the president's toolbox, like Section 122. If he had concerns about unfair trade practices or trade imbalances, well, the president should have used Section 122, not IEEPA. So the court has already kind of given a little bit of a nod to 122. Even though they also use that same decision to end IEEPA. So with that in place, Section 122 might become the new buzzword in trade coming up here pretty soon. We're going to see how this works. After that 150 days is maybe a good question. What happens after that point? Well, Congress would have to reauthorize it for another period, which, given the Congress's ability to work with the president now, they're probably likely to do. So this 150 days, 15% could be extended 1, 2, 3 times until Congress changes its mind. Section 338 is another one. This is meant to address discriminatory actions against U.S. products. And so, when something is discriminated against, it means that there's maybe a tariff barrier or a non-tariff barrier against U.S. products, specifically that a country levels against the U.S. products that they don't level against maybe some other countries, similar products. So maybe, for instance, U.S. chicken. Maybe that has a certain trade restriction from, I don't know, the EU, that maybe the EU doesn't show that same level of restriction toward other countries' chickens. So that is maybe one place where this Section 338 could come into play. It doesn't require an investigation either. The ITC is supposed to give periodic reports about those unfair trade practices, but it can move pretty quickly, and it can be duties up to 50%. This is another one that could come up very, very well, or very common as well. And it also has the potential for very broad use on all products from all countries, and any other countries that maybe benefits from that U.S. discrimination arrangement are also within scope of getting their own Section 338 50% tariff. So effectively what this means is that even if the IEEPA tariffs are struck down completely, we could have up to 65% tariffs from these two other provisions here combined on different products, on different countries. And so even if IEEPA is defeated, the Hydra heads from the toolbox of 122 and 338 may still pop up. The last one I want to talk about is another place we may see some more action, is expanded 232. 232 on the next slide has 232 investigations that are active, and there's many that are active happening right now. Steel and aluminum, we already talked about, automotive, copper, timber derivatives, that includes furniture, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals and ingredients, heavy trucks, critical minerals and derivatives, commercial airline things here. These keep expanding on national security grounds. It's very possible more investigations are going to be launched. These due dates are when the U.S. Trade Representative has to submit his report and recommendation to the president, saying like, hey, we've looked into the copper trade. We think that U.S. products, this is a tariff would benefit. Maybe for timber, we need a quota system in place. Maybe for semiconductors, we want to do something. All of those reports are due toward the winter, but they could be published earlier. There's no reason they couldn't have these reports come to the president sooner, and there's no reason why new investigations on 232 could start. 232, though, does target specific industries and specific products, but they can get pretty broad. And so I'll kind of highlight the steel and aluminum ones. Right now, they're accepting comments about should we include more products, more HTS codes under Section 232 for steel and aluminum. And they're getting pretty broad. There's quite a few companies out there who are pushing to include their products, their particular things within this from all sorts of different chapters, that maybe otherwise wouldn't necessarily be thought of. So no doubt this will continue. This may be kind of the slow burn way that the president can keep ratcheting up tariffs on certain products. Not quite the countrywide level he has been using, but more the product-wide level instead. Okay, with that, I'm going to pause here and get a drink of water. I want to bring on stage my colleague Alex, talk a little bit about our tariff simulator, which is something that we've been very happy to see come to life here. And this would have been great if we had presented this yesterday before all these 232 changes went into effect. Our team has been working on making some updates here. But Alex, what is this tariff calculator? You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so hi everybody. I'm Alex, the Senior Director of Engineering, and I'm here to show you the tool that we've been working on after basically observing that the number one question we got from all of our customers, and we see it here in the Q&A as well, is actually how do these tariffs work? How does it apply to me, and what effect will this have on my imported goods? Now, we already have all this data internal, and we very closely look at the Federal Registry and try to implement everything immediately as it comes in to update our internal systems. And we figured, why not help everybody, also people that are not customers of Flexport, and make it available to everybody. So we're very excited that you can all use it. We'll drop the link in the chat, and you're free to use it and try it out. And I think Marcus, we should show them here as well with some demos. Now, the tool has not been updated with the latest steel and aluminium because we're still testing a bunch of edge cases. So we'll roll out that release later today, or tomorrow, depending on which time zone you're in, because we'd rather be accurate with these things. So you'll see the last date change when we've updated the tool. But yeah, let me share my screen.
Yeah, I have a few examples I think people might find really, really valuable that I'd like to plug in here. Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to tariffs.flexport.com, you'll land on this page. And from here, you can search for the description of the HTS code. We have some examples going here. And below, we'll actually see the calculation. So where do you want to start, Marcus?
Well, I actually want to start with that search bar real quick here, just to kind of give a quick context here. We really built this in mind for kind of the trade compliance professional, right? This was really kind of meant for somebody who really kind of knows what's going on in supply chain, not just kind of maybe more casual person here, but maybe somebody that's, they know what an HTS code is, they know how to find it, they have a good understanding of it, but they're just trying to make sense of all these tariffs that are moving. So those descriptions that you search for, that's from the HTS language. That's maybe not your commercial language that maybe you use. For example, if you search computer, you wouldn't find anything. But if you search automated data processing machine, you'll find 8471 comes up. So just an example here. This is really much more targeted toward people that know maybe what an HTS code is and maybe not their first rodeo here. So if you try to search for standard things, you may not find it right away, but certainly for any of the tariff people out there, tariff nerds, I think you'll find a lot of value. So yeah, let's take a look. Alex, why don't you pull up some copper tubing? I think this is a good illustration here. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I'll just give you an HTS code if you don't mind.
That's the one that ends in 0035.
Yep, yep, the 7412. That's right. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at this one here. And this right off the bat, this is just kind of the standard view, but where I think this tariff tool really shines is when you click the blue bar, the show advanced options and details. This suddenly gives you a little bit more of like a little bit beyond the headline. This gives you the real story, the full story behind what's happening here. So let's take maybe a look at this one here. So we have our country of origin, China. Why don't we put in an entry date of, say, maybe 6/25? Just change that entry date there to June 25th, if you wouldn't mind. All right, and so you'll notice here you have your tariff calculation on the right-hand side. You have your standard 3%. You have your section 301, list 3, right? This is Chinese origin. You also get your 20% IEEPA from China, but you also see your Annex 2 exclusion from the reciprocal. So that 10% that applied to China, that no longer applies, right? And this just pops in automatically because we know this HTS code is on the Annex 2 list. We don't even want to show you the option about the 10. We just want to make that choice for you so you just have clear data right there. On that same point, Alex, why don't we tweak the entry date just a little bit? Why don't you make that entry date maybe say like June 15? You'll just notice a second field just popped up down below, the date of loading. Well, why did the date of loading pop up? As you may recall, as I said earlier in our tariff news, there's a date of loading in transit exemption potentially for that 0.28 code. So if you had that 0.28 in transit exemption, that would exempt you also from the tariffs. Now, as it happens, this is on Annex 2, so you're already exempted from those reciprocal tariffs, but we don't want to give you that date of loading field if it's not relevant. But if you do have a certain entry that you want to look at, import your date of loading, and you can also see how their date of loading may have affected your total duty rate that you have to pay. Yeah, that's a good one. Let's maybe do another one, I think, for what all that chaos was in early April. There are some shoes here. I'll just say we have some shoes from Nicaragua, Central American. Those are short transit times, and they had some funny business around that implementation back there in April.
Nicaragua.
Yeah. Nicaragua, right. So let's just say our entry date here was 4/9. So that was on the April 9th, the one day when those country-specific rates were in effect here. So we'll change our entry date to April 9th. Look at the right-hand side, right? Just a quick validation. Make sure your date of loading is right. So let's make sure we get that in order. Let's make our loading date 4/6, right? Central America, famous for their short transit times, real pain in the butt if you file ISF. So here we are. We can see that we have our standard duty rate of 20% on these shoes, but we can also see the 18%, the one-day applicability of the reciprocal tariff, the 18% specific to Nicaragua. Now, wait a minute, Nicaragua, that's a DR-CAFTA country. So Alex, under the import programs, why don't you go ahead and apply indicator P here and see what our duty rate comes down to. Okay, so yeah, we lost that 20% standard rate, but remember that applicable rate of the 18% is still in effect. Now, what if the vessel was delayed one day? Why don't you bump our entry date, Alex, to 4/10?
Oh.
All of a sudden, just now 10%. So if you were stuck in limbo with everybody else, it actually would have paid you 8% to wait one day here. So really great to kind of see how this all sort of moves in one go, especially around this date. When we were building this tool, I was like, we got to make sense for people out there about how this works in April. What the hell happened? All these loading dates. People need to understand how this works. That was a big part of what we did here. So. Okay, let's. I want to show this one. This is a great suite example here. Maybe we can do that 1806 example, Alex. This is chocolate confections, by the way. So a great tariff option here. Let's change the country of origin here to Mexico. Let's do that. Let's take a look here. Okay, the reason I want to show this is because USMCA, outside of perhaps some automotive examples that just came up, is still actually very valuable, and we can really see how this really comes out. So let's change the dates here to, let's just say, entry date today and date of loading today. Say it's a truck shipment from Mexico of this chocolate. Okay, so you see on the right-hand side, we've got 31% overall tariff. We have 25% IEEPA from Mexico. They don't have any reciprocal duties, but there's also 6% as a standard, so a total of 31%. But USMCA is still one of the only free trade agreement programs left where you can actually get down to 0%. So why don't you go ahead, Alex, and apply USMCA indicator from the import programs. And look at that. We actually can have a 0%, right? We can actually get free chocolate for everybody from Mexico, assuming it, of course, qualifies as originating under the terms of USMCA. But I want to highlight this. We have a free trade agreement with Australia, right? Why don't we see, what if the country of origin was Australia? Do they get that same benefit? That's a great question, right? The answer is no. They don't get that specific USMCA IEEPA removal, and they don't have that USMCA reciprocal exclusion. So doing all of this here, you can see, like, even though there's a free trade agreement with Australia, and Alex, if you want, you can even, like, apply it. That even just still brings it down to 10%. You still have to pay 10%. But USMCA is still potentially the most valuable free trade agreement out there because it gives you the biggest savings even today. What about, let's do one last one here, maybe this liquid leak detector. Here's a funny machine with other functions not elsewhere specified. Let's take a look here. Let's change this back to China. Let's go through a China example. Okay. We'll just do some entry dates here, just kind of maybe random. We'll just say entry date May 21, loaded April 21. So reciprocal tariffs were in effect. Higher ones here, yeah. So okay, there we go. Okay, so we had May 21, right? This was after the May 14th pause of 125%. So China got back down to 10. So that's correct there. But this does have an exclusion for it if you have certain liquid leak detectors. So if you look at those exclusion codes toward the bottom of the screen, Alex, why don't you click the toggle in 9903.8869? That's an exclusion for specifically liquid leak detectors. So this classification includes all sorts of weird machinery. However, the 69 toggle is specific to China, specific to like detectors that look for leaks in your home. So if you have that, you can see the potential exclusion codes. I think the last thing we can do to kind of wrap up here is we can scroll down to the very bottom here, one step below this, and also see, well, okay, if I wanted to import these kind of same ideas, these kind of other machines, what are the countries that were the biggest producers of this back in 2024, right? So we pulled in international trade data from 2024 to move to this heat map here. So let's see, where did some of these countries come from? What was their average duty rate spend? We have all this data, right? We have all this data from CBP, or I'm sorry, from the Bureau of Industry Statistics. We have all this data. We just loaded it here, right? So let's take a look. Like, what can we actually save from? Maybe it's cheaper to get it from Mexico than it would be from China, right? USMCA is still a very valuable free trade agreement. That really drives down your duty rate. Maybe getting it from China is not so good. Where is maybe a good nearshoring or reshoring opportunity for your products? So obviously we can't, we don't have a whole list of suppliers and have that whole catalog. We can at least give you a place to target from. Talk to your buyers, talk to your sourcing agents. Maybe they can find something where you can lower your overall duty exposure, even if maybe your costs of goods change. Yeah, I like those a lot. But I guess maybe, Alex, just a couple of quick questions here, and I can see this in the Q&A. Can you just talk a little bit more about, like, how often do we keep this up? Who maintains it? How has this kind of been put together?
Yeah, we maintain it as Flexport. So as I said, like, we follow the federal registry very closely, and when we notice that new regulations come out, so really we only look at official notices, I guess they're called. We process them we bake them into the program, and we do a lot of testing, as we're doing like right now. The team is testing everything for the new steel and aluminum updates, and then we release it out, and you'll see that the last updated indicator will get bumped, so you're working with the latest version. So we're not pulling data from any other source but the federal registry at this point.
Okay, yeah, very good. Well, we are going to continue to do so. And I also want to highlight there's this little like sort of gray bar we put down on the bottom right side of the calculator, just for people to kind of know about when was the last update done. So last update was June 2nd. So if you've been plugging in 232 tariffs and you've noticed, well, wait a minute, this isn't quite calculating right, you're correct. But I challenge you to take a look at it tomorrow when we push and we merge in all the PRs and everything, and it comes together.
Yeah, and for all the observant watchers, this is all in EU time, in EU date format, because my browser is configured for EU. You'll get that configured for your own browser. And the other thing, we're today only supporting US imports and US HTS code regulations. We have plans to expand this to other countries later on. We're also embedding this in several places into our own product. If you're interested in doing this in bulk or having us review your entire product library with a similar methodology, please reach out. We're very happy to do it. But in the nearby future, the calculator that you see here is only going to be US, and it's only going to be one HS code at a time.
I would go on a limb here and say maybe the US is in need of this calculator the most.
More than perhaps
the most dynamic country in terms of tariff rules. So good to probably keep the emphasis on the US, but excited to see rest of the world too. Yeah. Well, what do you say, Alex? Should we look at some of the questions we got here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Oh, wait, no, I have to do a plug slide. Let's go back to the presentation. I'm sorry. Just a moment here, then we can go to the questions. Okay, real quick, if you haven't yet, you may have heard about this. We offer a free ACE analysis. So ACE is the automated commercial environment where CBP keeps and tracks all of your trade data. And it can be difficult to make sense of it. And we have great tools about how to do so for free. If you're curious about this, kind of see like where's maybe some places to save costs, where have there been inconsistencies for previous brokers, when have free trade agreement claims been missed that maybe we need to work on a 1520D for. This can show you all of that and more. Please feel free to reach out to Customs BD. We can show you up to 5 years of your past data and try to help you find some savings opportunity, which are just even more valuable in today's environment. On the next slide here, we also have our context here in case you want to have this. The customs advisory questions. So if you're curious about like how much of my product do I need to manufacture in another country to change its country of origin, reach out to advisory at Flexport, classification support, as well as this free ACE analysis. Do reach out to Customs BD at the links there. Okay. Now we can go to the Q&A here. And I know we're going over, but I definitely chewed up my time with the 232 updates. So I'm going to put that one on the administration, not myself, for running over. All right.
Let me go. You want me to read you one of the questions, Marcus? I think.
Yeah, let's do it. Yep.
If the court ruling is upheld, how will refunds be issued? And is there a possibility that the president pivot to section 301, 122, etc. will make them retroactive?
Yes, very high chance that there's a pivot to one of those ones, I think. If IEEPA was ever going to be invalidated by the court, it needed that first ruling to go the way it went. So, importers should be encouraged that maybe IEEPA is going to go through. Could 301 be retroactive? Could 122 be retroactive? I don't think so, but a lot of both 301 and 122 they haven't tried yet. So I would be curious to know if they could. I do think for refunds, there's probably going to be two options. One is either it's going to be you have to manually request it each time. We're talking PSC's protests. If you went through the exclusion hurricane of 2019 and 2020, that can be a bit of a headache. The other option that may be a lot cleaner is just refunding all duties collected by those lines. So anytime CBP can see one of those lines, they just issue automatic refunds. Maybe you don't even have to ask. It probably depends on how exactly the court cases go, but we are saying that if you do have liquidated entries, which isn't the case for most people, but if you have entries toward the end of the year that start to liquidate, it may be worth considering protests to keep those entries open while those court cases move ahead. We could very well have resolution by then. The court cases could be decided, potentially in short order. But if this lags on, if this drags into next year, having protests filed on those liquidated entries where you paid IEEPA tariffs just to keep them open may be relevant, maybe a smart move to kind of defend yourself and kind of keep that revenue refund opportunity open. Yeah, good question.
All right, I've got another one for you. If somebody wants to do a temporary import from Germany into the US and try to get it exempt from tariffs, what form do we need to use and will be impacted by the 10% import tariff?
If you wanted to do a temporary import under a temporary inbound procedure from Germany, that may be a relevant choice. There's a lot of kind of pieces that move along with that, but there is actually the duty-free way to import stuff under Chapter 98, which does not have any of those additional like 99 code duties, any of these IEEPA duties. You can have that. I do kind of say when I have TIBs, I sort of look at, you need to kind of assess the headache of maintaining and taking care of a TIB versus the duty savings opportunity that may come with that. So a temporary in-bond may be a good solution for this person from Germany. But if you just imported it normally and you claim 10%, the only way you could potentially get it back on the reciprocals would be through drawback. Remember, IEEPA reciprocal tariffs are eligible for drawback. IEEPA fentanyl is not eligible for drawback. Section 232 is not eligible for drawback. So that is another hassle. So if you already have a drawback program, you could use that. But otherwise, this could be a good case for a temporary in-bond, especially if it's like for a trade show, for instance.
Great answer. Another one, given that President Trump relied on the authority of EAPA to terminate Section 321 for China origin products, does that mean that if the ruling of the Court of International Trade is upheld, either the U.S. Court of Appeals or the U.S. Supreme Court, that Section 321 for China would be restored?
Great detailed question. I have the same thought.
Very detailed.
I read the order, and the order, it says, so remember, there is a decision, and then there is the court order resulting from that decision. The court order said the actions under those 4 executive orders are suspended. They need to be stopped. So that meant duty collection. But remember, in the China one, they also stopped de minimis treatment. So with that, the answer, I guess, to the question is, I think so, unless the court clarifies that it was only targeting tariffs. If the order doesn't get changed, I think it would restore de minimis. However, the court could clarify it. And I would also point out a couple of counterpoints to this. One, the plaintiffs in the case didn't challenge de minimis. They were challenging the tariffs. They didn't try to get de minimis reinstated. They're trying to get the tariffs taken away. So that wasn't an issue in the case. So that may be a technical reason why that doesn't go through. The second one is in the decision that was mentioned, de minimis barely came up. I think it was mentioned exactly once, and it wasn't even brought up in a major substantive way. So the decision didn't really seem to address de minimis. The plaintiffs didn't want de minimis removed, but the order was written broadly. And because the order was written broadly, that could mean de minimis is swept up in it. But unless the court clarifies their position, we won't know.
All right, thanks. I have one question here on the tool I can answer on anti-dumping and countervailing. Somebody asks if we can also calculate those for you. The answer is that we don't, because there's no way for us to make sure whether they apply or not. And so we will flag that you need to look at it, but we cannot say for sure based on just the HTS code without any further information what you need to do. So reach out to your trade advisor, reach out to us to understand what you need to do there.
Yep. I'll also just maybe say there's a couple other things that we're working on, like kind of the next release as well. So you'll notice HMF, MPF, any of those miscellaneous fees, alcohol, cigarette taxes, none of that is in our calculator either. But because none of them have really changed with all of this sort of thing. So it's not going to show you that full rate with all those little pesky fees, but it will show you the main things which are changing, which are the large tariff regulations. So. Yep.
That's right. Yeah, we're going after the biggest pain and trying to help the people that need the help the most at the moment. Yep. After the 90-day pause, how can we identify what the rates will be, for example, China and Vietnam?
Actually, that's a great use for the calculator too. So we baked that in. So if you wanted to, you can set the dates to the post expiration, which actually brings me to another point about the philosophy of our calculator. We're only going off what's actually been published. If it's not published, it won't be on our calculator. Like there's been a lot of talk, there's been a lot of rumor. Last few days, apparently trade talks between China and the US aren't going too well, but we're going to implement our calculator runs based on what's actually been published, what's actually written. So we are going to include that. So if you actually then bumped out the calculator dates to say July 9th, for a Vietnam import, you would see that 46% reciprocal rate come back in. If you send out, a Chinese import to say your entry date is August 14th, August 15th, you'll see that 34% reciprocal come back in. So that's kind of a quick way to find it. If you want to do full tariff nerd, you can go into, starting at 9903.01.33 and after, and you can look at all the specific country rates that come in. I think it was 49 countries, or no, 63 countries that had specific rates, I believe, but, 63 unique HTS codes. But yeah, I don't forget exactly. Good thing we built the calculator, so I don't have to remember, right?
Exactly. And I see another question that's really a feature request is like, when will we get the 2025 data onto the trade map? And I think the answer is as soon as it gets published. We rely on the name of the source where we get it from.
I think it's the Bureau of Industry Statistics that collects this through the Census Department, I believe. Yep.
Yeah. If there is a way for us to do it real time, we would love to. But as far as I know, we can't do that today. So Marcus, for value breakout, so 232, this person is asking, my understanding is that the remainder non-steel or aluminium is now subject to IEEPA.
Yes.
Reciprocal. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. On that slide where I broke out my third point, I kind of walked through that example with the New Zealand bracket. That's exactly what's happening. So yeah, right now, if any part of it is subject to aluminum tariffs, even 1%, if 1% of the value is subject to aluminum tariffs, that 100% of the product was exempted from reciprocals. That is no longer happening. That is no longer the case. So now, if something is not subject to aluminum tariffs, for instance, you are still going to have to pay reciprocal on the non-aluminum portion of that item. So even if you are getting your value breakout, you're not getting that great savings opportunity you were having before. You're still going to have to pay reciprocal on the value of the non-aluminum, non-steel portion of the import. Yep. That's a key takeaway. Yep.
All right. And somebody's asking if you've seen an approach where services around the purchase are broken out as a separate line, or is that legitimate?
Yeah, I guess we can maybe. Yeah, I won't give clear advice for this. It could be legitimate. There are certain things that Customs has said, and in the valuation encyclopedia, they say these are services that are not what they call incident to the international shipment of goods. If it's a service that's completely unrelated, it doesn't actually accrue to the seller, those sorts of things that maybe are baked into a commercial invoice, they may be able to be deducted from the value legitimately. However, be cautious with this. There are also plenty of services that you can't break out. So like you can't break out, oh, well, my cost was actually $1 per unit, but then the factory makes 50 cents of profit. No. They say you have to declare the full 150 per unit. You can't, exclude the profit. In fact, if you look at some of the more calculated measures of valuation, they force you to kind of bring in profit or general kind of expenses overall. So I will say it's possible, but don't assume that you'll be able to break out much from a commercial invoice for some of these additional services. Certain kinds of testing is another one, like quality assurance testing. Some of that is you can deduct. Some of it you cannot. So I'm hesitant to kind of give blanket advice on this, but I guess what I'd just say is probably not, but there will probably be legitimate instances where there could be services that you could consider breaking out. And that's a great question for our advisory team. That's just advisory@flexport.com. They can work with you on that.
Yeah, great. I'll do a very quick one and then one more from Marcus, and then we'll let everybody go.
Okay.
I got a question around if we're going to offer this database basically also as an API for others to be able to use. We're getting that question a lot, which is great, because give something away for free and then people want to pay for it. I think we've done a good job there. We're considering it for sure, but not on the short term. For now, we're really focused. We're putting all our energy behind making sure it's up to date, making sure it has full coverage, and making sure you're getting the most out of it. And we'll think about integrations later, maybe in summer or something like that. But it's not. We're not sure yet if and when we're going to do that. And then I think I have one more from Marcus, which we may have already addressed a little in the presentation. If the court ruling is upheld, how will refunds be issued? And is there a possibility that the president pivot to section 301, 122, etc., will make them retroactive?
Oh, yeah, I think we addressed something similar to that. But yes, the answer is like yes, 122, 338 pivots are likely, and that yes, we could also, refunds are either going to be manual and painful, like it was with 301 exclusions, or they could be very seamless and automatic, which we're all hoping for. But it kind of remains to be seen. There was no order for refunds given as part of that court order, so it may be something importers have to claim, fight for, ask for, but I'm afraid we don't really know at this point. And while the rulings are on hold, we can't really worry about refunds at this point.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Marcus. That was really great and a lot of new insights. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you like the tool. I hope you get to use it. Take it for a spin, and I hope it helps. Marcus, any last words before we drop off?
No, there are going to be more feature rollouts for this tool. This is going to be something that we're maintaining, and we'll continue to have options here. So keep checking in on it. Note how it is, and if you don't like something about it, let us know. We want to be able to move fast. We hope this is the best tool out there. I think it is. It's also not paywalled, so it's another great tool also just for that reason. So no, I'm very excited. Please let me know what you think, and hope to hear from many of you soon.
Yeah. All right. Great.
Cool.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great day.
Thanks all. Bye.